And believe it or not, she was. Now, like I said, they could have brought Velma back and everything, but as I was saying, I think they realized, maybe in my opinion, I think they realized that Daphne was just as popular as Shaggy and Scooby. In fact, she was more popular than Scrappy, believe it or not. But anyway, for whatever reason, and probably the best idea, best choice that they could have gone with, they brought Daphne back. Now, what was funny about this also is I think, in my opinion, and I think anybody might agree with this, the reason they brought Daphne back wasn't just because she was going to be the eye candy, as I talked about in one video, for the show, and be the most noticeable new character or re-debuting character. But I think they also saw something there that kind of clicked. You see, in earlier incarnations of Scooby-Doo, excuse me, in earlier incarnations of Scooby-Doo, Daphne was more acceptable to possibly the supernatural being real. In other words, Daphne was more on Shaggy and Scooby's side than she would be on Fred and Velma's. So that's another reason I think they brought her back, because she would be more acceptable and more understanding of things not being the real deal. As a matter of fact, if you go and watch the 1998 movie Zombie Island, which came out 15 years later, she still is portrayed as someone that's more acceptable about what happened, about the supernatural being real, and not, being like Fred and Velma and thinking, oh, it's something else. So, anyway, that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, they brought her back. I think also another reason, and a lot of fans do believe with this, is because I think they wanted to give Shaggy a female counterpart. A female counterpart that, like him, accepted the fact that there was more than just, that there was more to this whole supernatural stuff than just people in masks. But also, I think in a sense, they realized they might need to give somebody, and this is in the opinions of a lot of fans, that they need to give Shaggy a bit of a, like I said, a counterpart, but maybe a potential love interest. And they sort of did that, and they sort of acknowledged that. Like I said, they sort of did that, and they sort of acknowledged that, because there were several instances in the all-new Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show, in the following season of the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries, as well as in the series that followed, 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, that definitely indicated that, well, they were more than just companions, they were more than just friends, that they were more. They were actually boyfriend and girlfriend. And like I said, there's many instances. You take a look at them dancing in No Thanks Ass Manx. There's an instance there. And some fans even look at indications in the previous incarnations as being hints as well, as I mentioned in another video. But again, I think that was another reason, was to give him sort of a female counterpart that basically understood and accepted the supernatural as being real instead of just people being in masks. Now, another thing about this as well, and TLCHG, that long-haired creepy guy in his retrospective, pointed this out as well. And that is the fact that when Daphne was brought back, she was given much-needed character development. True, she was still Daphne from the previous incarnations, no doubt about that. But they brought her back and gave her the character development that was needed. Now, like I said, she was still the Daphne that, like in the other incarnations, accepted the possibility of things being, of the supernatural being real and not being just people in masks. She was more acceptable about that, and they kept that in there. But they also made her more of a leader. They made her kind of grow up and realize, in a character development way, that she can't always be scared. She's got to be brave. She's got to take on, she's got to take on the role of leader. And she does that in the show. She really does that. She does it in her own unique way, but she does it. So, yeah, she got a lot much more character development. Character development and everything. But she was still Daphne. There were several times she would still be the damsel in distress, even though she would get caught at the same time Shaggy would be. Go figure. But, like I said, one of the other things, but like I said, when fans look at the decision by Hanna-Barbera to bring Daphne back, they think it was probably the best one they could have done. And to them, even to this day, acknowledges that maybe Hanna-Barbera wanted to do something more with Shaggy and Daphne, maybe basically make them an item, which was pretty much full-on indicated throughout the three seasons that they were together. And like I said, a lot of fans would indicate in all these other previous Scooby-Doo incarnations that there were hints that that was possibly going to happen. As a matter of fact, there's an episode in the Scooby-Doo show that ends with Daphne dancing with Scooby, who is indeed Shaggy's dog. So, yeah, Daphne dancing with Shaggy's dog kind of somewhat is a hint to some fans that maybe there's something there between Daphne and Shaggy. We just don't know. Or we just didn't know at that time what we did when the 83 series came about. I know it didn't make much sense there, and I apologize. Now, the 83 series was pretty good. It was basically, the first season was, the standard 11-minute short formats, 2 11-minute shorts. And like I said, they did a lot more in those 11 minutes than I think they would ever do in the 7-minute format that they went with for some odd reason. But they did a lot more. They did a lot more, and like I said, bringing Daphne in, they brought in a character that, like Shaggy and Scooby and even Scrappy, would be more acceptable of things being more supernatural and magical than than just people in masks. Even though they still kept the people in masks or format as well, which still proves to be popular even to this day. Now, the following season, we had the show renamed. It still kept the 11-minute format, but there were several instances where the 11-minute format in the second season would be used as sort of like a chapter-like deal. So in other words, you would have one part go by, like the first episode, I think this was the first episode of the second season, you had Happy Birthday Scooby-Doo Part 1 and Happy Birthday Scooby-Doo Part 2. This was a format that some shows, that mostly a show like, let's say, My Little Pony, the original My Little Pony back in the 1980s, they took a page out of, because even though it was the same story in those 22 minutes, they were separated into 2 separate parts to give you almost a chapter-like feel, like a little mini-novel chapter-like feel. And that's what they did in the 1984 New Scooby-Doo Mysteries. Gave it a more mini-novel chapter feel. More of a mini-novel chapter feel there. And so like I said, you would have, the first episode I believe was Happy Birthday Scooby-Doo. So instead of just being one episode, it was Part 1, Part 2. The first 11 minutes was Part 1, the second 11 minutes was Part 2. Go figure, right? But that's how they did it. And I guess in a sense, like I said, it was to kind of give it that episodic mini-novel chapter-like feel. Now, the other unique thing about this is the intro, of course. Besides the name change being different, excuse me, the intro was different as well. The intro basically was very thriller-like inspired. That's right. The intro, many parts of it was inspired by, of course, Michael Jackson's Thriller, which still was a big hit at that time, and even to this day, because it's probably one of the most played songs during Halloween. But anyway, the intro was very thriller inspired. And then the other unique thing about this, and there were some fans that were actually happy about this, because even though the show was proving to be probably, because even though this format in this incarnation of the show, in this incarnation of the franchise was proving to probably be the most popular out of the entire franchise at that time. And that's just in my opinion, I think in the opinions of many others. Even though it was proving to be the most popular at the time, one of the things that fans were actually happy about is they brought back Fred and Velma. That's right, they brought them back. But they didn't bring them back on a full-time basis. No, they brought them back in certain episodes. As a matter of fact, there were 3 episodes where the entire gang was brought back together. The first episode, of course, of Season 2, which again was rechristened the New Scooby-Doo Mysteries, the first episode I should say, introduced this idea, introduced this new addition, this new addition to the format, or this new format to the show, whatever you want to call it, when Velma and Fred were brought back. And if that's not all, they continued this on, like I said, for 2 more episodes. The next episode was the astronaut ghost episode, which introduced us to Velma's uncle, and thus we had Velma and Fred right off the bat. That's right. We didn't just have them come out, like they did, 5-10 minutes in. No. We didn't have that. Sorry, I kind of was thinking there for a second. We didn't have that. Basically, they were there right off the bat. Like it was a regular Mystery Inc. episode, which was pretty cool. Then, the third appearance together was a Halloween hassle at Dracula's castle, where they decide to spend Halloween with Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby, and Scrappy. Now, Fred and Velma, of course, wouldn't just appear together to do a Mystery Inc. reunion either. They'd also appear individually at times to team up with the gang, to team up with Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby, and Scrappy. That's right, they would do that. There was one episode, A Night Louse at the White House, where Velma was the only one brought back. Then Fred, for some odd reason, was brought back twice on his own. One was a Sherlock Holmes-like story, and then the other was, of course, the Nutcracker Scoop, which you would think, being a Christmas episode, they would have had both in there. But no, it was just Fred 2 times. And I think the reason for this at the time, whether you're a Velma fan or you're not, I think it's because Fred proved to be more popular in a sense than Velma did. I know that sounds strange. And that's my dog in the background. Yeah, that's my dog barking at something. But like I said, even though you might be a Velma fan, as hard as this might be to hear, I think at the time Fred was more popular than she was, and fans wanted to see him back, probably more so. And if not the fans, the creative staff. Now, besides that, like I said, the format was still the same. There were several, if not more, episodes. Now, like I said, the format was pretty much the same. And there were episodes that were just like the previous season, where it was just Daphne, Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy, and that was it. So, with that said, the question I think anybody would have, was Scooby-Doo Mysteries a good enough show? Did it help keep the franchise going and re-peak and revive the interest in the show? And like I said earlier, I think many people will agree when I say, yes, it did. Because as I mentioned, I think this probably was, these next 3 years, 3 to 4 years, from all new Scooby-Doo, Scrappy-Doo show, to the following season, which was rechristened the New Scooby-Doo Mysteries, to the next year, The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo proved to be the more successful of probably the entire franchise. The reason being is due to the fact that it went back to the old "Where Are You" format of the person in a mask, but also mixed in that supernatural element that fans have been wanting to see. As well as they brought back a character that I have to admit, in my opinion, was probably the third most popular character in the franchise at that time, and even to this day. You know, they brought her back because I think, one, they knew she would be good, she would be the best re-addition to the show, but also she'd be that eye candy that would catch people's eyes. You know, not just the male eyes, but anybody's eyes. Like, whoa, look, like, whoa, she's back? You know, and all that. So, and also, I think in a sense, bringing her back was also an intention to bring a more female fan base back into the franchise. Bring more female interest into the franchise again. So, to me, does the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries, aka the all-new Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show, hit a home run? Oh yeah, it more than does that. It hits a grand slam, folks. It hits a grand slam all the way. And like I said, and I think nobody will disagree with me, it definitely revived interest. It definitely saved the franchise. It definitely repeat people's interest. And it really set the tone for what we would probably get later on. Because when you take a look at the movies, the direct-to-video movies, you take a look at what's new, you even take a look at, I hate to say this, Mystery Incorporated, and you see that character development in the characters, and that character development was set back in 1983 to 85, or to 86, 87. That's when it was set. So, did they do a good job with it? Of course they did. And just like, you know, and just like with Scooby-Doo show, and even the 7-minute shorts, it also introduced us to more of Scooby's family. It really did. You know, it introduced us to Dixie-Doo. It introduced us to Whoopsie-Doo, to Mama-Doo and Dada-Doo. You know, it introduced us to these characters. And even, I think, introduced us to Dooby-Dooby-Doo. So, it introduced us to a variety of Scooby's family, as well as like as much as I hate to say it, the 7-minute shorts also introduced us to another different format that I think would continue on for a while, and that is the fact that instead of giving the relatives the Scooby name, we went by the Doo name. Yeah, there was no Scoobies anymore. It was just Doo, which I kind of have to give Hanna-Barbera credit, because it sounds like to me what they did is they set a standard right there with both incarnations by saying that there's, well, basically indicating that there's two sides of Scooby's family. The Scooby side has to be Mama Doo's family, or Mumsy Doo's family, and the Doo side has to be Dada Doo's family. That's the only way I can look at it. So, anyway, like I said, did it set the tone? And for what we would get later on? Oh yeah, it really did. It really set the tone, especially in this current incarnation. To me, it definitely showed the characters can be developed and be more than what they are. And it definitely proved that you could stick to a very successful format, but you could also mix in that format that fans want to see. And you've definitely seen that there, and you can see it carried over into these newer movies and shows. So, to me, it definitely hits a grand slam out of the park. It's definitely worth finding and watching. I will say this.